Well, welcome back to Blender. This is going to be a quick video on how to use edit mode. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it. So last time we made some things out of the simple default shapes. We used the sphere, cone, cube, cylinder, just some of those very basic shapes to make some things. And today we'll look at how to take some of those default shapes and actually do something a little bit more interesting with them. So not only can you move and scale and rotate shapes in Blender, you can also move the components that make up those shapes. So I know that sounds a little bit complex, but we'll get right into it here with some examples. So in object mode, you see that you have your object center, and when you move, scale, or rotate anything, it all happens from that center. And you really can only move like that point. So how do we actually get access to all of the pieces that make up this shape? So if you go here, you can go into edit mode. And you can also get there by pushing tab. So that's what I do almost all the time. Sorry, since last video, Blender 3.6 came out, so I downloaded that so I could be using the newest version, but I had to get screencast keys working again. So now you can see all of the buttons that I'm pushing. So back to what I was saying about tab. So if you push tab, that brings you between object mode and edit mode. And you can see that change happening there. So object mode, edit mode. And now you can see that I can actually select like the vertices that make up this shape. So just like that. So vertices, edges, and faces. So you can select anything from there. And if you push, like it has here, if you push 1, 2, and 3 on the keyboard, then you can actually select those as well. So here, 1, 2, 3, we'll select vertices, edges, and faces. So cool. And the same transforms work on these as well. So you can push S to scale, R to rotate, and you can push G to move. An interesting thing to note about G is you can double tap G, and that will slide along the edges. So it could be a little bit more clear if I select one of these spheres here. So if I select this edge, you can see that I can slide that edge along the other. So it's not just moving, that is actually sliding it along these. So if I'm moving it this way, it's going to slide along all of these edges, and if I'm moving it down, it's going to slide along all of those lower edges. So cool. So that's the basics of moving, scaling, rotating, and also selecting those components with 1, 2, and 3 for vertex, edge, and face. Great, and now we're going to look at some tools that you can use with this. So you can use ctrl R, which will make a loop cut. So you can make like this line hat here, and you can scale out the end, something like that. So you can make your shapes a little bit more interesting. One thing to note with the loop cut tool is that it doesn't always work unless you have quads. So like here, it would make a loop around the whole snowman, but on the cone, since the cone has triangles that make it up, so you can see that each of these isn't a quad, it's a triangle that comes to a point. And so if I try making a loop cut, it's not actually going to cut through that because the loop cut tool needs quads. That's the easiest way of explaining it. So if you have this line of quads, it's just going to put that loop cut straight down through the center of that. And again, from last class, mentioned that if you left click, it selects something, so it's like pushing enter. And if you right click, that cancels. So you can have, and if you scroll up and down, that increases the number of cuts. So I can increase the number of cuts here. You can also punch in a number on your keyboard. So let's say that I want 5 cuts. And if I left click once, now I can slide those edges. And if I want it to stay where it was, then I can right click and cancel, and all of those edges will be centered. So let me show that one more time. So I can push Ctrl R, increase the number of loops, left click, and then right click. And that will center that again. Otherwise, if you want to make an edge that's right up next to another one, or that's closer, you can actually slide around and then use left click to have that. So if you want an edge to just be centered, then you left click and right click, and if you want that edge to be in a very specific spot, then you left click. So the basics of that loop cut tool. Next tool that we're going to talk about is the extrude tool. So I can select a face here and push E, and E is going to extrude it out, and you can see that it uses that face as normal, so the direction that that face is pointing is the direction that that will be extruded. Anyway, so that's the basics of the extrude tool. And now there's the bevel edges tool. It's the next one that I want to discuss here. So I can say that I select this edge here. I can use ctrl B to bevel that edge. And you may get something happening like this on your computer as well. So that bevel looks okay, but you can see that on this bevel is really squished. Like it's not actually beveling well. And that's actually the problem of the object scale here. So since I squished this, now the scale of this is 1.4, 1.4, and 0.083. And so this is really flattened in the Z direction. You can see that here. And so when the bevel tool or when any of these tools are used, they are looking at the geometry really before the scale is applied. And so I can use Control A and apply the scale. And now, if I make that bevel, you can see that that works a lot more predictably. And you can actually do that for all of your shapes. So I can just push A to select everything, and then I can use Control A, apply the scale, and now everything has a scale of 111, which is, like I said, it'll work a lot more predictably. And now that we looked at the bevel edge tool, we're going to take a look at bevel vertex. So what bevel vertex allows us to do is we can take a point like the nose here, and you can see that Control B doesn't work because we only have a vertex selected, but if you use Control Shift B, now that allows us to use this tool. And if I bevel this back, I could increase the segments, but I'm just going to leave it at one segment. And I was using the middle scroll wheel to do that. So if I leave it at one segment, then you see that it turned all of those triangles into quads. So now if I want, I can use Control R, make a loop cut, and I'm just going to increase this until I have like relatively even quads over all the geometry. So it's looking good. And then if I wanted to, like we learned before, I can take the end of the nose, extrude it, and scale it down a couple times just so that it comes to that point again. So great. And one last thing, a little bonus tool before this video ends. I can select a vertex or anything, and I can turn on this, which the shortcut for that is O, which is your soft fall off tool. And when you use it the first time, it's usually really large. So you can use the scroll wheel to increase or decrease the size of it. And you can see the size being read out right up in this area. So nice. So if it's like so big that it's off screen, you can scroll and you can see the number getting smaller until it actually shows up. Because it used to come in like really big, and so you can't see where it is. But then as you scroll that smaller, it comes on screen. Anyway, you can use this to make some larger adjustments. So you only have to select the vertex or whatever pieces you want to be affected 100%, and then that soft fall off adjusts the rest of the vertices around it. So that's how that works. And there's a bunch of settings here. So you can use constant, and that's going to just have anything that's inside the circle is going to be moved 100%, and then anything outside is not going to be moved at all. So, and if you have something like that where your faces go really weird colors and it doesn't like know the normal or whatever, you can tab into object mode and back into edit mode, and that'll fix that. Okay. Next one that I want to mention is random. So random does just what it says. You can move things just randomly, and so it'll select a random pattern. So if you want to have a noisy surface, that is a way of getting it. And then the rest of these are just different ways of having it fall off. So another one that I use a lot is linear, because then you can get some like really nice corners. It's linear, so that's more for hard surface modeling. But yeah, that about does it for this video and the different kinds of tools that you can use in edit mode. So let me know in the comments if you have any questions or if there's a video that you'd like to see. But I'm going to try to get through all of the basic introductory sections of Blender and just give it a very simple overview of each part of the software. And then I'll delve into more depth once I get an overall introduction to the different tools. So hope that you enjoyed this, and I will see you in the next one.